Hey everyone, and welcome to Tennis Uncovered. I'm your host, Alex Hyman, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Kieran Archer. Kieran is a sports journalist and media manager who's worked on arguably the biggest sporting event in the world. Any guesses out there? Yeah, that's right. He's worked on Wimbledon as a reporter. Now, this is truly the perfect way to start off Tennis Uncovered, and I think you're going to learn so much. But that's it from me. If you're all set, let's get into the chat with Kieran. Kieran Archer, thanks for joining the Tennis Uncovered podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good at the moment. Yeah, I'm happy to be here working in mostly a football-orientated environment. I always take the opportunity to talk about tennis when I can.
Good on you. So yeah, where are you now? You're obviously working in football, but we're going to delve into the tennis side of your work you've done before. But where are you now and what are you up to?
Yeah, so I currently work at the Foundation of Light, which is the official charity of Sunderland AFC. So we do a lot of work with the football club, although we are an independent organisation ourselves. Previously, I have had a lot of experience working within football itself, doing sort of media management for football clubs. So it is a little bit of a sidestep into something else for me, but really enjoying it.
Yeah, awesome. And we've obviously known each other for a few years now, having worked at that prestigious event in Ilkley. Tell us a bit about sort of the start of the journey. What was life like for you growing up? I'm going back a few years here now, but your sort of relationship with sport as a kid and then going into university. How did you first come into contact with sport? Did you play? What was it for you?
Yeah, so for me, I come from a very sort of passionate sports family. My granddad especially sort of, both my parents worked close to full-time growing up, so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and my granddad always had Sky Sports on around the time. We've got tennis again now, but back in the day when they had tennis before, so tennis was just one of the many sports that was always on in the household. I think it drove my grandma up the wall a bit, but it was when golf and football were on, but tennis was the one sport that she enjoyed as well, and I think I picked up on that. So football was obviously my main sport growing up, what I played most of, but I always, like a lot of people, around the time Wimbledon was on especially, tennis would be at the forefront of my mind, and it really did become my second sporting passion. I always wanted to play more of it, didn't realise how I could play more of it, didn't really look into clubs or anything because I was just young, so until I was about 14, 15, it was just playing a few times a year in the park when my friends had also been interested in tennis because Wimbledon was on. Eventually, I did join a club and start playing a bit more regularly.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And you're obviously we're different in the places we're from. I'm from down south. You're probably the exact opposite. Tennis for me, and from what I've seen growing up, is that in the south, it's really prominent. There's so much tennis going on. Do you feel like, from being from the north, there's a bit of disparity between the amount of tennis that goes on down south to up north, or not so much?
Yeah, I've definitely always felt that way. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of people have this view of tennis where it's a privileged sport. I really don't see that. It does maybe have a few more barriers to entry than football does, but I'd say it has a lot of fewer barrier entries than golf does, and a lot of people up north still play golf. What I'd say is it's just the visibility of tennis. I think in my town, a town of about 70,000 people, so it's not a tiny place, it's not a big place. And the only tennis courts I can think of is 3 park courts and 1 tennis club, which had 6 outdoor only courts. So there's just outside the town, there's a couple of indoor facilities, and we're quite close to Leeds, which has some good facilities, but there's just not that visibility. You don't see many places to play tennis, and I always think for me, tennis, it's more, if you're in that world, it might be easier to get into. And I think that's maybe why a lot of professional players were coached by their parents growing up, because they had people to introduce them to that world. I don't think the barriers to entry are too high, but it's just being in that world kind of helps.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Yeah, it's interesting comparing the two sort of styles of getting into tennis, whether you're from what area you're from. And okay, so delving into a little bit more, your getting into the industry. You went to study sports media, or sports journalism specifically, wasn't it, at University of Sunderland? Tell us, what was the motivation behind studying sports journalism?
I just think working in sports was obviously the dream for me growing up. Probably being a professional sports player in either football, tennis was probably the dream, but I've never committed to something enough to make that possible. And to be honest, I'm probably not naturally talented enough either to have that base to build on.
I don't know about that, Kieran.
Yeah,
I've seen you hit a few balls.
yeah. So yeah, I've always had strong written communication, especially. So journalism, that just seemed like the best chance for me to kind of work in sports. So pursued it. I started with the written stuff because, like I say, that's where I always saw myself quite strong, written communication. But I have tried experiencing other things like video. So it was good to kind of build that portfolio, that experience more.
Yeah, interesting. What were there any other areas of getting into the sports industry that you had thought about other than journalism, communications, or was it always that specific entrance that appealed to you?
No, like I say, aside from being a player, which was never really on the cards, journalism just was the first thing that came to mind. I had briefly entertained the idea of getting into Formula One by being an automotive engineer, but
Oh, wow.
decided not to go down that route either. It was maths. I was fantastic at GCSE maths, but A-level maths was a completely different level. So I just turned around and thought, I can't do this. I'm going to have to change course. So I changed my A-levels to English language, media studies, and started going down that route instead.
Okay, fascinating. And you were involved in the tennis society at university, am I right in saying?
Yeah, I was. So I was probably the fifth or sixth player in a four-man team. So I didn't always see game time. I was sort of the player that would always be there in case one of the main four guys wasn't available. And yeah, it was just good. So I turned up to my first session. Like I say, I played in clubs for a couple of years between like the ages of 14 and 16 when I finally had that sort of impetus to research clubs myself. And I stopped during A levels just because like I was finding maths tough and A levels tough in general, so I just stopped all maths, sport, and extra stuff. But when I went to university, it was a big thing to get involved in sport again. So got amongst it. I went to a beginner's session initially because I was just picking the sport back up. But the problem is I was just so far above the beginner's session, the coach moved me into the team session. And then I found myself like I was at this awful in-between level of too good for the beginners, not good enough for the advanced session, but he just thought like I was better in that session in terms of my development. I wouldn't learn anything from a beginner's session. So that's how I found myself on the fringes of a team. Saw a little bit of game time, but not as much as I'd like.
Well, that's what's so great. And that's sort of the point of this podcast. You've sort of summed it up really well there, is the fact the sports industry isn't all about the on-court ability or the on-pitch ability. There's so much opportunity on offer for all walks of life in the sports industry, right? And that's what you've found out, and what I'm finding out too. And so I think a lot of the listeners hopefully will identify with that, with being a good sportsman or sportswoman, but maybe not finding that ability to be able to go professional. But there's still so much on offer, right? So linking to that, what advice would you have for those listening that are maybe at university now? They're part of a sport society, or they play a lot of sport. They don't see it going further than that in terms of playing, but actually want to work in the sports industry and specifically the tennis industry. What would you advise to them sort of finishing off university?
I'd just say build that portfolio, get that experience. It's great if you're already within that sporting society. You'll already have so many contacts there as a platform. At first, if you're building that experience, if journalism or media is what you're going into, building that interview experience is going to be a lot easier with peers and friends. That's going to make it easier at the point where you have to interview people that you're not familiar with, that you don't really know. So it's a great environment if you're already within the sports society to start building that experience and start building that body of work, which I think when you come to the point where you graduate and you're looking for jobs, yes, the degree's great, but grade that you've got on paper is important, but also the body of work that you've got behind you, I think, is just as crucial, if not more important.
Yeah, it's so great. That's something that I've learned as well. Is just the fact that you're at a university. It's everyone's learning. Everyone's still learning their craft. It's not going to be perfect. Whether that's playing sport, whether that's doing your portfolio of work, but it's that freedom to make mistakes, which I found so useful. Even in things like this, it's not going to be perfect straight away, but hopefully the podcast will get better and better. What was your work like? Say, you mentioned your portfolio. Did you do much tennis work at university, or was it mainly football? Tell us a bit about that.
It was mostly football. I covered the tennis team a few times
Okay.
just because I was amongst it. But it just came down to interests, sort of. I knew that covering the university tennis team didn't have too many eyes on it because of just I studied in the northeast of England in Sunderland where I live now, and it's got a bit of a tennis culture there, but not a strong tennis culture. So I started going down the non-league football route. I mean, football is by far and away the main sport up here, and the quality and the level that you get down to quite low levels of non-league is incredible. I think northeast teams used to win the FA Vars, which is like the national competition for amateur clubs year on year because it's just such a strong scene up here. So I was doing sort of media management for semi-professional football clubs for a lot of years, initially voluntary, and it was initially just social media updates and match reports, but then the club I was at, the program editor left, so I started to get familiar with the Adobe Creative Suite and using InDesign to create match day programs for supporters to buy and read. And then the next step was video highlights. I got an excellent scholarship because I got good A-level grades, and that's Sunderland not being the most attractive university on paper. They offered you this incentive if you had good grades to an extra £1,000, not even a loan, for people with high grades. So when that came in January, I bought a camera, I bought a tripod, and I started getting familiar with Premiere Pro, self-teaching, and started creating highlights packages as well.
Wow, that is amazing because I noticed the fact that when you started doing that stuff, you mentioned on your LinkedIn that ability to be able to video edit, make graphics, write press releases. Was that something that you learned sort of on the job whilst at university and whilst doing these media roles while studying, or was that something you did these courses for? What was it that allowed you to learn all of this?
Yeah, it was mostly self-taught. So I think luckily Sunderland, the lecturers we had are great, and they do keep on the pulse with the industry. Recently they've realised a lot of graduates are going into these media management roles rather than traditional journalism, so they've introduced that as a module on the course since I've left. So they do have that sort of outlook of always changing the course to the industry. And while I was there, we did have a video journalism module, but that wasn't until towards the end of first year. We had another module which was creating video for social media. That was in second year, but I already went into those modules with this base level because of this just getting out there, building my portfolio and the self-teaching in the Creative Suite. So it really did give me a head start in those modules where they teach you a bit of video editing skills that I already had that base level to build on.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think that just shows your sort of willingness to get stuck in and just do it, because that's the best way to learn, right? Is just getting stuck in and doing it on the job like you did. It's really impressive. Okay. So that's sort of the start of your journey, I guess. Moving slightly more onto the tennis side of things, what was the first break you had into the tennis industry? Obviously, we first met at Ilkley at the ATP Challenger event. And there's the ITF women's event as well, the W100. Was that your first break, or were you doing stuff before in tennis then?
I'd done a little bit in tennis, not sort of as consistently. Sunderland, it has got sort of it's called the tennis centre, with indoor courts, international level courts. So we've got the space for need behind the baseline and stuff to host professional events.
Mm-hmm.
So we had ITF 25k events, which is a level where, would you say, around 300th in the world might be sort of your best players there at 25ks.
Yeah, sort of ranges from sort of 250, 300 to the 800s, 900s, doesn't it? I think, and then depending on a few wild
Yeah.
cards. But yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, so Sunderland was hosting one of them, and I went along because I just saw this chance to actually go and cover sort of professional tennis. So I'm like, well, I've got to go along, and we'd just come back from a trip to Dusseldorf, as the journalism groups all went on that trip, and I had to quickly get to campus to get one of the cameras and tripods that they rent out for students, and headed straight to the tennis centre and started covering the event. And then the next day was finals day, and in the finals were Emma Raducanu in the women's final. Unfortunately, she lost. And Jack Draper in the men's final, and he won, and it was crazy. Like, back then, I'd heard the name Jack Draper a bit. It was actually the first I'd heard of Emma Raducanu, and I was there covering this event where they were both playing finals. I had no idea that within sort of 18 months, Emma would win a US Open, and Jack Draper, within a couple of years, he'd be amongst the top 20 in the world. So it was really cool to think that I got this chance to cover something that we're at before the main breakouts. I interviewed Jack Draper, and I always make the joke that Jack Draper actually carried my third year of university, because we went into COVID lockdown not long after that tournament, and all of a sudden my portfolio assignments and things like that were looking a little bit more ropey in terms of I mean, I did have a lot of work to go in, but I lost a couple of months to build more work. So I got like 3 different pieces out of that Jack Draper interview to just help bulk it out a little bit. So I always say that in a weird way, it got me through that third year of university.
How cool is that? That's so cool that, you've covered Emma Raducanu and Jack Draper maybe a couple of years before they got really big. That's amazing. And that's what's so cool about doing these smaller events, right? As a student, you're likely to get involved because there's more access. You get such good access to the players. But then who knows where they could go on to and what they could go on to be. And that's a pretty good example there, 2 world-class players that a lot of the tennis world know, if not all of us know those names. That's incredible. So what did you do in terms of content whilst there? Did you film? You made interviews? What was the content?
Yeah, so a big mistake. Always ask for extra batteries when you're renting out a camera from the university team. So I only had 1 battery, and I realised halfway through the Emma Raducanu match it was starting to get a little bit low. So I didn't take the opportunity to interview Emma or the player that beat her, Victoria Tomova, because I wanted to save it for the men's final. That's quite bad, I know, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough battery to get through the rest of the event. So I did have enough battery at the end of the day to interview Jack Draper. So what it was, I wrote sort of a roundup of the finals day I got some quotes from Richard Joyner, who was the tournament director of the event, used some of the quotes from Jack Draper, of Graham, who runs the Sunderland Tennis Centre, got a few quotes from them in. Then after that roundup piece, I did a couple of pieces from different angles within the Jack Draper interview, so gave me some good lines about he wasn't targeting a specific sort of ranking by the end of the year, because he knows like tomorrow that he could get injured and that'd wipe out the rest of his year, because I asked him about his ambition for the rest of the year.
Okay.
And then that worked really well when we went into COVID lockdown, that I had this video piece to produce, but after we went into lockdown, he had to change the assignment a little bit, so we had to record it sort of in his bedrooms pretty much on just any topic we wanted. So I chose how the COVID lockdowns affected tennis, and I used these quotes about Jack Draper not aiming for any type of ranking, because he knows like an injury could happen or something as a nice angle of like, he was in a great run of form, but now he's not able to build his ranking because there's no more events as an in for this video. And I just delivered a piece on, like I say, how the COVID lockdown has affected professional tennis.
Fascinating. And have you seen or reported on Raducanu and Draper since then? Have you interviewed them, and have they recognised you?
No, I haven't actually. I went to watch one of Jack Draper's matches at Wimbledon, but I'd already filed my report that day. I think that might be my first time on centre. And I'd honestly just gone on to get on centre court and to watch Jack Draper. I'd already done my work for the day. So I just watched it. It wasn't a big sort of local angle for me at Wimbledon with the Yorkshire stuff, and unfortunately went out a little bit earlier than I thought it might after he was building some good results in the grass court season. So when it got later in the tournament and I lost my Yorkshire angles, I thought, well, that's when I move on to British angles. But unfortunately, at that point, he was no longer in the tournament either. So a bit of a shame. I'm sure I will run into Jack Draper again in the future, but I doubt he even remembers me. And I think that's a funny thing. Like, I talk about how he's carried my third year of university, whereas that was probably for him just such a small thing that so far in the past, him doing a quick post-match interview after winning an ITF 25k title in Sunderland.
Yeah, if you think about the amount of interviews he's done since then, I bet it's gradually increased as his rankings increase. So, yeah, you never know. You got a memorable face, Kieran. Yeah. How important is that relationship with the players that you build as a journalist? For those sort of budding journalists watching, it's important, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think when we look back at that first Ilkley tournament that I covered, when it ended up, Nate Verbains was the main player I was following because Leeds born, so it was content for both the Yorkshire Post and the Yorkshire Evening Post, which is under the same umbrella of newspapers, but it's Leeds specific. So it was big for my editor that he could get content in both papers through the Nate Verbains stories. So I suggested that I follow her stories, and he was happy for me to go with it. So followed her progress in the women's doubles, and she made it to the final, lost in the final with Maya Lumsden as her partner. And I think having already built that rapport with her throughout the week from the early interviews, I think after the final she gave me quite a good sort of open response, where it was the biggest final she'd played in her career to that point in terms of the points on offer. And it was a big disappointment for her, but rather than sort of being sheltered and not wanting to open up on the disappointment, she did actually put that disappointment out on show, which I think it was good to see how much it meant for her to win at something of a home tournament for her. It was good that she, as much, I think I'd got to the point where I was supporting her so much, I was disappointed by that as well. So I think it was good to kind of almost echo her emotions. She could tell I was disappointed, she was disappointed, but it made her comfortable and allowed her to open up.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because, I mean, Naktha is such a lovely person, isn't she? She's always going to be nice to anyone that wants to interview her or shows an interest. So maybe it's a bad example to use, but tennis players can sometimes be difficult. You know, it's emotional on court, and they're still very much emotional post finishing their match, win or lose often. How do you manage that as someone who has so much contact time with professional athletes and tennis players when you're covering an event? Is there an art to managing that?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that my way is better or other people's ways are wrong, because I understand sort of different situations call for different styles. I'd say I'm lucky in most of the work I do where my style's been okay, and for me it's usually that I kind of present myself as I'm on the player's side. Like, if they've won, I'm happy that they've won because they won my story. That's what I wanted to report on. If they lose, then I'm disappointed that they've lost because I was supporting them. And, I think that helps them pick up on that and almost, talk openly because, like they say, they know I'm not trying to trick them. They know that I'm not trying to get certain angles out of them. They know that I just want to know how they've felt at that win or that defeat. And I realise if you're working for a national newspaper or maybe the press association, those kind of organisations where you might want certain sort of hits in terms of your angles, that you're not allowed to have that friendly approach with players. You might have to ask quite probing, difficult questions. So I'm lucky kind of with the work I've done so far that I've been able to just approach it from that angle. But I think when you are doing the work of sort of roundups of match reporting and things like that, I think being on the players' side has helped a lot, and that's what I've had in a lot of my work, being sort of a media manager for football clubs, because I'm working within the club. So I'm interviewing a manager that I work with all the time and who is an acquaintance. It helps me sort of have that rapport with them, that where they feel comfortable and they're able to express completely how they feel at whatever result it is, whether it's a win, whether it's a defeat.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and it's clearly working for you, because I've only seen you at the tennis events, but everyone seems to enjoy being interviewed by you, Naktha included. Okay, so we've touched on the Wimbledon experience, the big reporting experience this year, but tell us a bit about how that was. How was it? Your first Wimbledon reporting experience, wasn't it? How was it?
Yeah, it was. It was just unbelievable. Sort of, I think, because it had kind of come full circle from me, Wimbledon's what I'd remembered a lot from my childhood. Like I say, tennis was one thing that my grandma was sort of really into out of all the sports that my granddad watched, which mostly wound her up. Tennis and Wimbledon especially is what she loved and connected with. And I think it was partly the sport and partly because she kind of aspires to sort of that lifestyle that Wimbledon, that people associate with Wimbledon. And I think for me, sort of going there, it felt like I just straight away I'd achieved something. And sort of you expect things to not live up to expectations, especially when you've built them up in your mind that long. I've never been able to attend just as a fan or anything, but it's just the most incredible place. The grounds are so beautiful. It's insane. I think I was speaking to Spencer Vignes, who's reported there for a few years for a few different. He does a lot of freelancing for different organisations, and before the first day got going, and I was just in the media centre, sort of doing my research work. He's like, go out there now, because at 11 o'clock it's like rush hour at King's Cross Station. Just all the people flood in trying to find their courts. So I'm like, okay, I'll go out and have a walk around the grounds. But also I loved it when it did hit 11, just seeing everyone filter in, and all of a sudden that hustle and bustle start. It was just, it really is an incredible place.
Yeah, it's so iconic, isn't it? When you just explain that, I just have memories of sort of the pictures of the queue coming in when they've sort of come along with the barriers, and the sort of soldiers, I think, if you like, are sort of leading the people in. I think it's around 10 when the gates open, and then obviously 11 is when the outside courts start. It is properly rush hour, but there's such a buzz that it's probably worth getting stuck in the middle of it. But talk us through a day of what it's like reporting at Wimbledon, because not many people can say they've done that. What it's like? What's the process like from the moment you get to the grounds? Where do you go? Who do you speak to? What do you prioritise? Yeah, talk us through it.
Yeah, I'd say so. The day probably starts the evening before at whatever point, and you'll know this having done media management at tournaments, whatever time the order of play comes through, which is kind of directly affected by when the matches are ending and what time they're ending and who's through the day before. So sometimes the order of play will come through at like 11:30 on a night or something. But from the point the order of the play comes through, provided I'm not in bed yet, I'll be looking at it straight away to see who I think my main angles are. I'll highlight them, but also I'll highlight backup plans in case none of my main angles are kind of coming through, or matches are running late on one court. Almost happened to me with Paul Jubb, who was like Yorkshire's main singles player in action, where his match was rain delayed 3 times and went to 5 sets, and I was pulling my hair out because I really wanted. I'd stuck by that match for so long. It needed to finish in time for me, otherwise I had very little backup plan.
Yeah.
So have backup plans, have other matches that you can cover just in case that happens.
Tennis often goes the other way to what you want, doesn't it? You want a short match, it goes long. You want a long match, it's done in straight sets in an hour, you know?
Yeah, that is what I've found. And when Jubb went 2 sets to love up, I'm thinking this is great. This is, Hull-born lad with everything that he went through growing up, finally getting his first win at Grand Slam level and at Wimbledon. And I really wanted it to happen for him. This was another case where I'm echoing the players' emotions. Like I was almost as emotionally invested in that match as that's quite harsh to say, but I imagine Paul Jupp was like I was so aligned with him at the point, and I really was living every point of that match, and it was such a shame. But hopefully it happens for him next year. It does. It often goes the opposite way to what you think. So that's why I study the order of play, and then I'll do research on the players that I'm covering and their most recent results, their ranking history, their performance on the grass courts especially. And I'll also be researching their opponents as well to see if there's anything interesting in there. I'll already be thinking about interview angles either way. You can't plot too far ahead because anything can happen, but you can be thinking, right, these are sort of the main points if they win, these are the main points if they lose. So I'll start thinking about that the day before. On events day, on the day of the match in particular, or each day, I'll go on to sort of, they have this like intranet thing at Wimbledon. You go in when you're reporting there, and they'll assign you a desk space somewhere, and you'll have a computer loaded up with this sort of their own internet where you can go on. There's this portal to request interviews. So rather than at Ilkley where I'll be talking to you on a morning, it's just all remote via a computer.
Wow.
Pretty much saying the same things as I say to you, sort of, I want this person win only, or I want this person win or lose, but there's just this computer to do it for you.
I bet the computer doesn't say to you, please win only. I'm always like that to you, please win. I don't want to get the player for you when they lose.
No, it doesn't. No. I mean, there will still be, at the other side of the computer receiving the request, there will be a person that has to go and actually grab the player.
Yeah.
There will be an Alex still. It's just I don't come face to face with the Alex. So I'll load in what interviews I want for the day. So I want this player win only, or I want this player win or lose. And then I'll just go around. I'll visit courts. I'll try and pick up on certain things. If a certain match is looking like it's definitely my main angle, I'll try and watch as much of it as possible so I can report on it as clearly as possible. But the thing is, with a tennis event, you've got so many things going on so many courts, and your main matches might be clashing. So you kind of have to back one horse or the other. Yeah. And if you end up having to go over a match you haven't watched, you might have to report on it a little bit more vaguely. So yeah, it's difficult to plan properly, but I still try and plan as much as possible to give myself the best chance possible. But yeah, that's the day. Log my interview requests, do my research on the players that I might be reporting on, and then get out and try and follow the stories.
And so, for the listeners, specifically your angle you've talked a bit about there is the Yorkshire angle, because you were reporting for the Yorkshire Post, right?
Yeah.
So
that's right.
You did a couple of. I noticed you did one on Kyle Edmund at Wimbledon, and you did Paul Jubb. Speaking with them, so when the player comes to is it a press conference room? Where do you speak to them?
Yeah, that depends. So once you've logged your interview request, you'll wait for a text to come through. That's another bit of advice. If you're reporting on a tennis event, make sure your phone's on silent, because you will be getting text through from a person organising the interviews.
So true.
You get pretty much every interview, you get every press conference and interview sent to you. So you'll be getting text throughout the day. Grigor Dimitrov is due in interview room 1 at this time. So once you get your time for the player you're interviewing, it's head to that area of the media pavilion where all the interview rooms and press conference rooms are. And I suppose it probably depends on how many people want them, whichever room they're applying to. So Paul Jubb was sent to the second biggest room, which was one of the proper press conference rooms. Looks almost like if you've ever watched Sky Sports News and a press conference with Guardiola or anyone comes up, it looks like those kind of rooms you'll see in football press conferences. With Kyle Edmund, I was in a small interview room with him with one other journalist, so it really depends. There's so many journalists in the Paul Jubb interview that I didn't get a chance to ask. I'm really annoyed that I didn't get a chance to ask, because you've also got people from the Press Association who they have so many stories to cover, because they supply stories for all the people that can't get out and cover it. That they don't, I don't think they really watch much of a match. They don't get out on the court too much. They just go in and they'll have kind of points that they want to hit, and they'll just ask things specific to the points that they want to hit, which is fair enough. You understand that kind of reporting needs that approach where you can't be too specific, you just have to go in and get what you need. But having sat through and watched his whole match on that court, sat through rain delays and things, I just felt like I had things that I could have asked him that other journalists weren't able to, but I was so overwhelmed because that was the first big press conference that I'd gone into at Wimbledon. I kind of disappeared into my shell a bit, and it's been a bit of a disappointment. And I think I did need an interview, like my Kyle Edmund interview, where I was in with one other journalist. So I got to build that confidence of asking questions and not being overwhelmed by the fact I'm at Wimbledon. Before that Paul Jubb interview, it's just a shame that was the first big press conference that I went into.
And that's the challenges, right? It's interesting because I've actually been in that role where I'm a moderator. It was in the COVID year, so all journalists were tuning in via Zoom to speak with the players, and I was the person in the smaller rooms more often than not, sort of saying, "All right, Kieran, you can go first from the Yorkshire Post," or I don't know, Jane from the Press Association, for example. That's not a real person, but if Jane was to exist, then we'd go to her. So I understand from the moderator side how difficult that is, but I also understand from your side, having had you explain there, that you've been the one that's actually watching the game. You've got more than enough background research for me to be able to go to, but then it's finding the balance for the moderator to go, okay, who's the bigger organisation, who's going to get the most coverage for the event and things like that. So it's difficult, but I guess that's a challenge of going to these bigger events, right? Is that you've got to manage your expectations, but also you've got to get in there when you can. You've got like 10, 15 other journalists that are trying to ask similar questions. How much of a challenge is that when you're in a big press conference room for you?
Yeah, I think the moderators do such a great job. I think if you raise your hand, they'll always try and come to you. I did learn that later on when I was finally in other big press conferences and sort of having had that experience of just sitting through and observing it once, when I should have asked questions. I really did want to ask questions in one. So I think obviously the moderators will know some people more than others, and I was a new face at the event. Obviously there'll have been people at the Press Association that cover it every year, and you can tell that straight away because they'll know them by first name. They'll raise their hand, but they'll say, "Janie, I'm coming to you," kind of thing. So but they do a great job of getting around everyone, and it is sometimes there's just so many people that want to ask so many questions that maybe they won't get a chance to get to you, but they'll always try and accommodate it. And that's something I found out at Wimbledon. It's even if you're one of the less important people covering the event, you're not really made to feel that way too much. So when I go in, there's a media gift for me on reception. It's the same media gift that everyone gets, but it's like I thought, honestly, being here for the Yorkshire Post, I wasn't expecting a gift, but I had a little Wimbledon media notebook in there, pen, a mug, and my water bottle, which was the same as like the players' water bottles with my name on and stuff. So
love it.
That was a nice little surprise, and they do the smile at everyone. The army people that let you on courts, they are some of the nicest people as well. Like I think everyone there is there to create the best experience possible, and even though I was somewhat down the pecking order, that wouldn't make you feel that way.
Yeah, no, that's so good, and that's good to hear that even at such a big event where they're trying to get as much coverage, but they almost don't need that coverage because they know it's gonna, it's one of the biggest sporting events in the world. So yeah, that's good to hear that everyone is kind to no matter who pops through those media doors. And okay, so we've heard a little bit about Wimbledon. There are benefits to covering an event such as Wimbledon, but there are also challenges like we've just discussed. This might be a tough question, but can you compare reporting from Wimbledon to reporting at an ITF and Challenger event such as Ilkley, where we've worked on before. Is there a comparison that can be made? What do you prefer?
I'd honestly say the fundamentals are often the same for the kind of work I do. When it's daily reports or specific match reports, it is just find out what time your matches are on the order of play, do your research on the players involved, request your interviews, and go out and follow the courts. The fundamentals are the same, but just the way it's delivered are very different. Like I say, at Wimbledon, you've got your own proper desk space rather than at Ilkley, we were in like a big gazebo thing, wasn't we? Where there's there's not that much table space, and we actually had quite a few people there on a few of the days. I think the second year especially, we had the ATP Challenger video people.
And when it's raining, everyone's under the gazebo and you're struggling for space.
Yeah. So they're like the main differences, like sort of just the technology and things at Wimbledon, having your own desk space, having this sort of portal where you're requesting interviews rather than going to the media manager themselves. And just Grand Slam matches, best of 5 sets in the men's. It does. When Paul Judd was one of the first on the order of play, I'm like, great. That's, even if it goes 5 sets, then you're looking at maybe 3.5, 4 hour match. It still means it'll be over in plenty of time to get my interview and file my report. But you take a best of 5 match which goes to all 5 and add in 3 rain delays, and all of a sudden I ended up filing my report 10 minutes later than deadline, but luckily the people, the editors, were still able to get it in.
Yeah, thank God for that. That's really interesting to hear that sort of comparison between that smaller event and something like Wimbledon. I think for people listening, it's interesting to hear that both are actually really important, especially for budding journalists that are getting into the industry. You're not going to be starting out at the likes of Wimbledon. You're going to be going to these ITFs, to these challenges where you can have the access and cover those sorts of events when you're not as well known, and then gradually, like yourself, you get into the likes of Wimbledon where you can start covering bigger events. So I'm wary of the time, Kieran. So just to finish off, personally, what are your plans moving forward? Obviously, you're largely still within the football sphere, but in terms of tennis events, what are you looking to do next? Are you looking to stay in the sorts of bigger events such as Wimbledon every year, or what's the plan?
I think I'm sort of how they say Michael Bublé defrosts at Christmas. I think I just defrost for the grass court swing and make myself available for the Yorkshire Post.
Best time of the year.
So I'll probably be at Ilkley again, and I'm hoping for the chance to go down to Wimbledon again with them. They've always really appreciated the work I've done for them, so I've always had good feedback about the work. So I hope that I'm still on the radar, and that'd be the plan initially. I have previously applied for full-time jobs in tennis. I got to interview at the LTA within a couple of months of graduating university, which it felt big for me to get an interview at the LTA, the national organisation for tennis, so soon after graduating, and I thought that was a good place to build from. But an opportunity with the LTA hasn't really come up for me since. There has been opportunities out there, but it's just never been the right time to apply since then. That would be something that maybe I would be interested in the future. The thing is, I'm just quite settled where I am right now. I'm enjoying the work I'm doing, but it is a dream sort of in the back of my mind to do more work in tennis. Maybe build on the contacts that I built at Wimbledon and at Ilkley, and maybe try and get more freelance stuff beyond the Yorkshire Post would be an initial plan. And if one day it transpired that I worked in tennis full time, I'm sure I'd love that.
You take it. Yeah, it's so great. And I think it's so interesting for the listeners to know that you can be in a full-time job somewhere, but you can still delve into the tennis industry and get those freelance gigs. You're a perfect example of one, teaching yourself stuff like we chatted about the video editing when you started out at university with those sort of smaller gigs, and then you gradually work your way up, and now you're managing to do those big jobs in football but also covering tennis. I think that's a real lesson that that if you manage your time well enough, you are able to do all sorts of things and create opportunities for yourself. So that's really cool. Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Kieran, thanks so much. Have you enjoyed it? First of all, do you like the new studio?
Yeah, I mean, it's class. I've seen you've also matched up the Labour Cup jacket to the poster as well.
I just noticed that too, and I was like, wow, I've nailed that first off. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be like that every episode, but may have to keep it. I think that works quite nicely.
Yeah, I packed my Wimbledon hoodie in my bag. I thought, do I go with the Sunderland FC jacket to show where I am now, or put on the Wimbledon hoodie? But I stuck by the Sunderland jacket in the end.
Yeah, cool. Well, the final question I have for you is, what next guest would you recommend onto the show? Is there a tennis guest that you have in mind?
Yeah, so sorry, I don't have the contact details actually, but it's someone I met quite recently, so Ilkley this year. The first year that you've missed, sadly, the team from LTA Beyond the Baseline were there. I think it's Whisper, the company that produces it.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
And there were a couple of people from that documentary team, and they were interesting to speak to. I got to know them quite well, and the work that they do, and I do love Beyond the Baseline. I hope it does pick up more traction as it goes along. I think the first episode this year was Paul Jubb involved, so that caught my interest straight away. I think it's so good that the content they're doing, and it would be interesting to see what it's like in a very different part of tennis reporting, rather than reporting on an event as a journalist, sort of producing this documentary style content for the LTA.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I actually hadn't thought of them, but yeah, Alex Forrest is the main producer for that. So yeah, we've seen him all around the British events, and it's such a good series. Series 1 came out last year, I think, and Series 2 has just been released on YouTube a few weeks ago. So yeah, definitely go check that out. But that is a great recommendation. Thanks, Kieran. And the final thing I want to mention, we're actually in the home of the Archers. We're at Cardiff Met University now, where we're recording this episode. And your last name is Archer, so I just feel like it's the perfect match for our first episode. You agree, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk about picking up and putting down hobbies all the time, and when I was a kid, and that's why I was never going to go pro at anything. I did try out archery at one point. I thought, it's my name, it seems right. I'd hit a gold, a 9, with my very second arrow. So I did think this is coming naturally, but then my third, my fourth, my fifth arrow didn't go quite as well, and eventually gave up on that one.
Stick to football and tennis, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Kieran, thanks so much, and good luck with everything, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Well, what an insightful episode that was with Kieran. Kieran, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. It was so good to catch up with you, and all the best for future reporting gigs. Listeners, do get in touch if you found the episode interesting and of use. I'm really keen to hear from you and start creating this sort of tennis uncovered community, if you like. So yeah, do get in touch. Remember to rate and subscribe the podcast. That would be a massive help to me and, of course, the growth of the podcast. And you can find us on socials at Tennis Uncovered Pod. But for now, thanks so much, and see you next time.